Hello and welcome. In today's video I'm going to talk about FIFA's darkest hour. Now, if I mentioned this to anybody, I think that, and I asked them what was the worst point that FIFA actually fell to, you'd probably mention the events leading up to the 2nd of December 2010, when the choice of the 2018 and the 2022, sorry, the 2018 and the 2022 World Cups was chosen, and the choice going first of all to Russia, and the second one going to, in 2022, going to Qatar. Later it was shown that there was massive corruption involved, bribes being paid. It even resulted in one of the members of the FIFA committee wearing a wire so that he could then record the conversations that other members of the committee were actually having. And that's pretty low, but there was a moment in time where it went even lower. And so for this video we're going to have to go back to 1973, and we have the road to the 1974 FIFA World Cup final, which was held in East Germany. The game I'm going to actually, or the games I should say really, I'm going to refer to the playoff between Chile and the Soviet Union. So let's have a look at Chile at that time. In 1970, Salvador Allende, he was elected president of Chile, and his government was overthrown by Augusto Pinochet on the 11th of September 1973 in a military coup, which also led to the death of Salvador Allende. Immediately after the coup, there were thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people who were detained across the country. One of the principal detention centers became the Estadio Nacional de Santiago, so the Santiago National Stadium. And over the next 2 months, thousands of prisoners passed through the stadium. Now, often regimes use stadiums as places to hold prisoners because it sort of lends itself in a sort of prison-like atmosphere. For example, during the Spanish Civil War, when the plotters that did the coup d'etat, the fascists, the Francoists, they used the stadium in Badajoz in southwestern Spain as a is effectively a camp where they murdered people. And I mean, there's plenty of other examples as well of stadiums being used. That was the first one that came into my mind. The people arrested in the case of Chile, where they were trade unionists, students, civil servants, political activists, members of the armed forces. Even they weren't safe, and they were those who were suspected of loyalty to Allende. Curiously enough, Pinochet himself had helped put down a coup not so long previously. Very few of these people were actually formally charged, and very few of them, of course, were guilty of anything. The detainees were held in improvised conditions in the stadium, amongst other places. There's plenty of other places where they were held, but as far as the stadium is concerned, they're held in the locker rooms, the corridors, the tunnels, the velodrome, and without a doubt we know that interrogations took place there. Torture, if they didn't want to talk, took place there, and some of these prisoners completely disappeared, or they were taken away somewhere else and they were never heard of again. And I can mention two names because they're known internationally. One, Charles Horman and Frank Teruggi, and they became international cases. But I mean, there was plenty of others, and it was mainly October of 1973, so in the weeks following the coup, that this was used as a detention centre. Now, let's go back to the football for a moment, and let's discuss the road to the World Cup for both Chile and the Soviet Union. So Chile was in the CONMEBOL group, CONMEBOL, and also appeared in that group was Peru and Venezuela. Venezuela later withdrew. So Chile lost 2-0 in Lima on the 29th of April 1973. On the 13th of May 1973, it won 2-0 in Santiago. And so both the teams were level on both points and goal difference. So a deciding match was held in Montevideo, where Chile won 2-1 to advance. I suspect that these days would probably be done by penalties. And I like the replay. And the replay is also good for the World Cup itself, because it's an extra match, which means extra cash. And that, at the end of the day, is what it's all about. As far as the Soviet Union was concerned, it competed in the UEFA, the European group, Group 9, and so they started off with a 1-0 loss to France in Paris in October 1972. Then they went to Dublin to play Ireland, where they won 2-1. In May 1973, they defeated Ireland 1-0 at home, and then they beat France with 2 late goals to secure their place in the playoff. So now the playoff in this case was that the winner of CONMEBOL would play the winner of the Group 9 competition. And this, however, now became somewhat difficult because of the political changes that had taken place. In Chile, there had been a coup d'etat, which was presented as an anti-communist coup. That's how it was presented to the world. And whereas I don't think Allende was a communist, that's the presentation. And of course, the Soviet Union might have seen it, Pinochet's regime, in rather bad light. So the first thing that the new regime in Chile did was to stop people leaving the country. And so it was a bit wary of sending its team to play in the Soviet Union. However, it did actually allow the squad to leave. But the players were instructed that they were not to make any political statements at all. And obviously there were concerns for their families. And the families remained under military surveillance. And if they decided to go missing en route or make any political statements, then their families could be got at. And there were certainly a couple of players, at least Carlos Caselli and Leonardo Veliz, who were noted for their support of the Allende government, which was democratically elected. Now, it's not clear, but it would appear that on the 17th of September 1973, as the team was on its way to the airport, members of the team went off to visit the team doctor, or the former team doctor, Alvaro Reyes, who was held in prison by the new rulers. So the idea was this: is that Chile to Moscow, or Santiago to Moscow, it's quite a long way, and so they interrupted the journey. So they flew initially to Mexico and had a friendly game against the Mexican national team on the 20th of September 1973, and Chile won 2-1. Now, the game was held in Moscow on the 26th of September 1973. So bear in mind, this is just 15 days after the anti-communist coup. I'm using the words that Pinochet would have used, not my own. And so first thing was, Chilean team gets there and there's problems. There was nobody from the Chilean embassy at the airport. 2 of the team were actually detained due to passport irregularities. Something, incidentally, that wouldn't surprise me could happen in 2026, but I digress. The atmosphere in Moscow was hostile. And there were 60,000 spectators in the stadium, and I bet the communist regime in Moscow organised the supporters that it wanted to be there. Now, the Chilean team was met with jeers. The Soviet authorities restricted media access. It didn't allow television cameras, so effectively all we know is what's actually written down about the match. Nobody bothered to film it. The game apparently was very tense. It was physical, and Chile played defensively. There were a few chances in the game, and it ended in 0-0. That must have disappointed the Soviet side, and they'd expected to win at home. Now they had an uphill task in Chile, so to be quite honest, the chance of them qualifying now was quite limited. And that might be important for what actually happened next. Now, the second leg had already been scheduled. It had been scheduled probably years in advance. The date, anyway, didn't know what was going to happen. And that would be on the 21st of November 1973 at the Estadio Nacional in Santiago. So, now, by this time, the authorities knew there was going to be a game, so they closed down the detention centre, moved everybody out. That was the plan. But the Soviet Union formally requested that FIFA move the match to somewhere else, a neutral venue. They cited both moral objections and concerns for player safety, and they argued that the stadium had been the site of mass detention, torture and killings, which was true. But Chile refused, and FIFA, now it's got a difficult situation, but at the end of the day, why should it decline this? Why should it allow this to happen? So I can understand from FIFA's point of view. So they declined the request. And this put FIFA at the centre of the controversy. The question was no longer whether Chile and the Soviet Union would play. It was whether FIFA was prepared to sanction an international match in a stadium that had just been used as a prison camp and where people had been murdered. FIFA sent a delegation to inspect the Estadio Nacional before the proposed second leg. The inspection party was headed by the FIFA General Secretary, Helmut Kaiser, he was accompanied by the Brazilian FIFA representative Abilio d'Almeida. And this was perhaps what I'm going to term the FIFA's darkest hour. So they went there at a time when the stadium, it was being emptied of the prisoners, but the prisoners were still there. Some of the prisoners have been there since the coup had actually happened on the 11th of September, and there are survivor testimonies of what they actually saw. And now the Kaiser and de Almeida didn't actually see everything. They just saw what the Chilean military officials wanted them to see. So the former detainees said it was a controlled and limited visit. Prisoners were kept away from the main stands, of course, and hidden in interior areas such as the dressing rooms, the corridors, lower sections of the stadium, etc. The FIFA visitors were shown the pitch, the public areas, but not the spaces where the detainees had been imprisoned. So one former prisoner, Jorge Montalegre, later described the scene as being one of two different worlds existing within the same structure. FIFA officials and journalists above, prisoners concealed below. Other witnesses recalled that soldiers directed the visitors through selected parts of the complex, allowing them to inspect the playing field, or the surface of the playing field, the official seating areas, whilst avoiding the rooms and corridors where the evidence of detention was the most visible. Now, some accounts suggest that the FIFA report didn't entirely deny the presence of detainees, but instead accepted the Chilean authorities' explanation that the people held there were merely being processed or having their identities checked. In other words, FIFA didn't necessarily inspect an empty stadium, rather accepted a sanitized version of what the military regime chose to show it. So the inspection therefore became less a genuine investigation than a staged reassurance. Chiesa and Del Madeira declared the Estadio Nacional suitable for the match. This meant that a venue which had held thousands of prisoners, political prisoners, some of whom already had disappeared and some of whom were to disappear, but this was approved for an international football match. The Soviet Union refused to travel. In its communication, it stated that its players could not, for moral reasons, compete in a stadium associated with repression. It also cited concerns that the team's safety could not be guaranteed despite diplomatic protections. The refusal was supported by several Allied countries, including East Germany, which had already qualified for the tournament. FIFA rejected the Soviet position. Rather than moving the match to a neutral ground, it ruled that the fixture should be given to Chile. The game should go ahead, and if the Soviet Union doesn't bother turning up, well, that's too bad. The Chileans will just play the game by themselves. So by the time the scheduled match, apparently there was no prisoners left in the Estadio Nacional, but that of course didn't erase what had happened there. Soviet objection was not simply that the detainees were present on the day of the game, it was that the match was being held in a place that had only just served as a centre of mass detention, torture and fear. So on the 21st of November 1973, FIFA ordered the match to proceed. And there were 17,000 spectators to watch the game, probably one of the most exciting games they've ever seen in their lives. And so the Chile player kicked off, and the ball was played forward until it reached the penalty area, where the captain Francisco Chamaco Valdez scored into the empty net. And moments later the referee ended the match, which only of course lasted a few seconds. And so strictly speaking, Chile didn't play the Soviet Union Santiago. There was no opponent, no contest, no real match. There was only a symbolic goal staged under FIFA's authority in a stadium whose recent history was by now known to the world. So Chile was actually awarded a second goal. It's called a walkover victory, and qualified for the World Cup. FIFA confirmed the result, but the Chileans asked for financial compensation because obviously they missed out on the gate, they missed out on the revenues from the advertising from the television and all the rest of it, but FIFA rejected this. And apart from that, everybody knows that FIFA never pays for anything, so I don't know who they expected to get the money from. Maybe the Soviet Union, don't know. Obviously, they had to do something for the fans the very same day, so they went on and played a friendly game against Santos of Brazil, and they lost 5-0. 5-0. It wasn't even the Brazilian national team, it was their team. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union thought, well, we've promised them a day out in South America, so they went to Central America, they went to Mexico, or Mexico's really North America, so that joke failed, and the Soviet Union beat the Mexicans 3-0. So in later years, some Soviet players suggest that their government may have also wished to avoid the risk of defeat against a politically opposed regime, framing the withdrawal as not only a moral but also a political decision. But whatever political calculations existed in Moscow, the central fact remained that FIFA had approved a World Cup qualifier in a stadium that had recently been used as by a military dictatorship as in a detention, torture and murder centre. So Chile now has qualified for the World Cup. I can sort of vaguely remember the draw for the World Cup, and I can remember that West Germany and East Germany were drawn into the same group, and into that group also went two other teams, Australia and Chile. And Chile didn't do so well. Actually, West Germany were beaten by East Germany, but went on to win the World Cup, and the only team at the World Cup 1974 that didn't lose a game was Scotland. Anyway, a friend of mine during the 2006 match, because I could actually pull out the maybe not now in the recent ones, but I could pull out the results of every World Cup game, not just the finals. But yeah, I think that goes up to about, well, in the last ones I can't do it. So anyway, I won't go into that too much. So anyway, Chile, West and East Germany qualified from the group, and Chile got 1 defeat and 2 draws. So, what can we make of this? Well, is it a political event or is it a footballing event? Because often people say, well, it's not about politics, it's about football, it's about sport. But the thing is this, if sporting nations represent political units, such as countries, then it is about politics. If they wanted to do it some other way, they could have maybe the dog owners team versus the cat owners team, or something like that. But that's not the way they do it. This match was in the aftermath of a coup in a stadium which had held thousands of prisoners. They have a FIFA inspection. Now, that's the scandal. Helmut Kaiser, Abilio de Amilde, I said his name wrong again. Abilio d'Almeida. They didn't really investigate the Estadio Nacional, nor were they encouraged to do so. But really, they should have known. I mean, you can just look at newspapers from the time. That's evidence enough. Sometimes you can say to people, well, he should have known that the Nazis were doing this, that and the other. Well, if it wasn't in the press, how are you supposed to know? In this case, all you got to do, there's your proof. Look at newspapers from the time. There's the poor people in there, the prisoners, who can see what's going on. And I think this is absolutely FIFA's darkest hour. A moment when the formal requirements of a fixture were treated as being more important than the human reality on the ground of which it was to be played. And that's how I see it. Now, I do like to offer an alternative. What should FIFA have done? They should have reported on the prisoners being held there. And I think that would have been sufficient reason for them to say that the game needs to be held somewhere else. There's, of course, another thing that needs to be pointed out as well. The Soviet Union. This is a country which had murdered millions and millions of people. It is one of the 2 countries that started the Second World War. The other one, of course, Nazi Germany, ceased to exist in 1945, but the Soviet Union existed until 1989. So it is a certain amount of hypocrisy when there were far more prisoners being held in the Soviet Union than were being held in Chile. Of course, the population difference between the 2 countries also was absolutely enormous, and the Moscow football ground wasn't the place where the prisoners were being held. But I do like to put that into perspective. So, from me, thank you very much for watching. Hope you found that interesting. It would have been nice if I could have shown you some clips or something like this. I have a problem with YouTube at the moment. Only today I had another video censored in some nonsense from YouTube. Landsberg execution of prisoners, war criminals. Video on that censored by YouTube. And 2 days ago, after doing a video on the illegitimate family, illegitimate children of Heinrich Himmler, I got a longer video, 38-minute video, censored by YouTube. It is, I mean, but in that case, they withdrew it quite quickly. But it's very difficult to compete against AI slop, and to be quite honest, I just honestly don't know what to do. One thing I'm doing, I'm giving you as members, you can which costs £5, €6 or $6. Now my specialisation is in the Second World War. Okay, and also certain like Soviet Union and communist countries, and I suppose I can add to that the fascist Italy, maybe even the state Spain under Franco, or at least the Spanish Civil War. So that's what I do. I mean, football history is not something I talk about in this. Had it not been for the politics around it, had it not been for the corruption which FIFA is noted for and continues to be, I don't know if corruption is necessarily the word, but sharp practice, let's say, that FIFA has now, then perhaps that's all part of this video. So from me in Germany, thanks for watching. Bye for now.